Hello, my name is Philip Hasheider, and I live on a Wisconsin farm where we pasture graze beef cattle. I've also written a lot, have over 32 books published, and my most recent one is the book that I'm going to talk about today. It was an early October morning, about 11 o'clock, when I found myself becoming an expert on dying, but also I found I became an expert on hope. Through no fault of my own, I was dead on our local hospital's fitness room floor for over 6 minutes after having completed a modest 20 arm curls. Why it happened at that particular point in time, in that particular space, with all the available help, and not 1 hour earlier when I was out in our farm's pasture, when I went out to check on our 27 head of grazing beef cattle. And those were questions that I would spend a lot of time afterwards wondering about. Why? Why then? Why there? Why not somewhere else? So what happened that morning was, as I went out to check on our beef cattle, every morning before was not a problem. I could walk up to them, I could walk amongst them, I could scratch them, I could pet them, I could talk with them. It was never a problem. That morning, I got about 300 feet from them. They were all lying down in the grass. And one of them saw me, jumped up, and looked at me, just stared at me, and perked her ears, looking at me, and took off running across the field. Went about 600 feet and stopped, turned around and looked at me. Well, that caught the attention of the rest of the cattle, if anyone is familiar with livestock. And they all got up, looked at me, and they took off across the field and stood next to her, and they all looked like they had seen a ghost. Well, I saw what I had to see, and everything was fine. That morning, I went back to our house. I had planned to have the tires of our car replaced. So I had an appointment in our local village, which is 12 miles away. And I figured, well, afterwards, I probably will go to have an exercise session at our local hospital's fitness and rehab center. And so I drove into town. Instead of turning right, I realized I had enough time where I could get my fitness session in before the car appointment. So instead of turning right to do that, I turned left and I went to the fitness area and parked the car, went downstairs, changed clothes, came back up, said hi to the 5 staff people that were monitoring the room, and went and stretched and started with the arm curl machine. Did my 20 arm curls, and I stood up, and the strangest thing happened. I could not understand why both of my forearms, when I looked down at, why both of them were tingling like they had fallen asleep. So one moment, I was standing next to that machine, and the next moment, I found myself in a completely different dimension. And I could say that what I found myself doing was sitting on what I can best describe as a raft, where I was floating. I was just floating on these waves, but they weren't water. These were energetic waves coming towards me. They were not only coming towards me, they were passing through me. And when I saw that, I looked at my hands and I saw that I did not have the body that I thought I had, that I recognized here. It was a translucent frame of what my body had been. And I actually never thought that this was an odd thing. It just felt so good. So I looked up, and what I saw in front of me, I can best describe as a golden yellow sphere that, if you can imagine packing 10 million suns into it, it glowed that brightly. But it was such that I could actually reach out and touch it and not get burned up. And this golden yellow orb, this sphere, was sending all of these energetic waves all over it to all different areas around me. And then I saw what I can describe as little silver lights shooting out all over the surface of this sphere, going in all different directions. It would be like if you had a sparkler. It was those kind of little lights that were shooting out all over and going in different directions. And I don't know how I knew, but at that moment, I knew I was experiencing a great intelligence, a great knowledge, a great love, because that was what it was sending out. It was sending out love and welcome, acceptance. And I understood that what I was looking at was what I'll call the source of all creation, the divine creator, the God essence. Pick whatever term resonates with you as to a knowledge that is infinite and expansive. Well, that was comforting, but I still didn't know why I was there. So, well, if you're at someplace else, you take a look around to see what else is there. So I looked over to my side as we think of directions, because this was a dimension that had no directions, it had no time, it had no space other than where it was. And what I saw was what I'll say is an infinite multitude of universes and dimensions that were suspended out in this eternal space. It would be like if we took our universe, everything we know about it, and press it down to a single sheet of paper, or that size, and suspend it out here in this eternal space. And then you put another one right next to it, another one next to that, and you keep going as far as you can possibly imagine infinity in all directions, as we understand up, down, sideways, crossways. Each one of these dimensions had a filament that reached up and attached itself to this God essence energy, this golden sphere of pulsing. And it was sending all this love, all this welcoming, all this acceptance, any adjective you want to describe, into all these different universes and dimensions. And each one of these, as they attached to this, what I'll describe as a spider web-like matrix that encompassed this golden sphere. And that was where all the love was being sent along these pathways. And I thought, wow, that's really something. So, being me, I decided to turn around and see what was behind me, as we understand front and back. And what I saw was infinity. And that was because the emulsion of eternity acted like a magnifying glass, so that the farther I looked, the clearer it all became. And I understood that this is where we all come from. At some point, we all carry the DNA of that God essence, that divine creator, that source of all creation. We all carry that with us wherever we are within the eternal space. Well, the interesting thing is I was seeing things through a different lens than I could possibly see with the low wattage of my eyes in this dimension. That's the best way I can explain it. And ironically, back at the hospital's fitness center, there were a dozen EMTs and hospital staff furiously working to restart my heart. I couldn't call them and tell them, it's fine. This is great where I am. Why would I want to leave? I couldn't tell them that they shouldn't feel bad if they didn't restart my heart. I mean, I was happy where I was. And then, in less than a blink of an eye, I left that dimension and I returned to my body. I returned from the longest trip I had ever taken in 6 minutes. But I returned with a vivid memory of my experience in that dimension. And yet, it would be another 8 months before I would finally be given the answer as to why I returned here, and subsequently I'm able to talk with you and others about my experience. So that is pretty much the nuts and bolts of what happened. There's more to it because obviously I survived. They finally restarted my heart. And it was not until 8 hours later that when I finally realized, I basically came to and understood that there was something else around me and I was no longer in that eternal dimension. And it was really confusing because the first thing I remember seeing, other than my wife Mary standing at the foot of this gurney that I was on, rubbing my feet, I had no idea what she was doing. And then I looked and I saw her son and her daughter and her fiance, and I had no idea what they were doing there. They certainly weren't in the same dimension I had been before. And at that point, I still hadn't realized that something had happened to me physically. Well, the next thing I saw was this clock on the wall that said 8 o'clock. And I said to somebody, well, that can't be right. And some person asked, well, what do you mean that can't be right? Well, it can't be 8 o'clock. I said, why not? Well, because time doesn't move backwards here. And he said to me, it's 8 o'clock at night. And that's when the confusion really kicked in. I found a name that I like, and it's called an interdimensional confusion, because as unaware or uncognizant as I was of what had happened to me during those 8 hours, it was like I was still back at that dimension, but yet here I am, kind of stuck in this body. That really hurt. That was the jumping off point for me, because I had so many questions afterwards, after my body started to function again, because it had completely shut down. And so it took me a while to physically be able to maneuver. It took me a long while to mentally be able to understand things. But as time went on, as I started to recover, both physically and mentally, I started to take notes and I started to write down things I remembered. I didn't tell anybody because I just didn't think anybody would believe me, because it wasn't an experience that I had been used to. So there was a lot of things going on all at once. I mean, here I was with 1 foot in this dimension, 1 foot in that eternal dimension, and trying to understand why now I have to resort back to looking at a clock to figure out what time it is, when in that other dimension, there was no time. Absolutely none. I did get a question from one person at a place I spoke at. They asked, well, how long do you think you were gone? Well, for me, my answer was, I felt I was gone for centuries. If you just stop and think about you moving through a week, a month, a year, and then a decade, and then a half century, and then a century, and then you start over. And as you're moving through all this, that's how long it felt. But I was absolutely flabbergasted when I got my medical reports to find out that it was a little over 6 minutes. I said that can't be possible because I was gone longer than that. And a doctor explained to me, no, that's what it says here, so that's how long you were gone. So I've been asked what I've learned from all this. And there's a number of things, and in different areas. I mean, one of the things I learned is that our bodies are really more than the sum of its parts. And by that, I mean, when I was standing next to the arm curl machine, I had all the body parts, 2 arms, 2 legs, had 2 eyes, 2 ears, a heart, kidneys, so on. I had all the same body parts as when I was lying dead on the floor, except for one thing. And that was that individual spark, that inner essence of myself, my soul, if you want to use another word, that had gone. And that's the part of me that was in that other dimension. And so once they finally got my heart restarted, because the body is also a memory system, because the brain, as long as it has enough oxygen, will remember that it has to tell the heart to keep beating. So once they were able to start my heart, I had to come back. So I know that we can do time travel, we can do space travel, because I did it. I wouldn't necessarily believe that if somebody else had told me that, but having experienced it, I know it's possible. One of the things that I've been asked is why I did come back. What was I given? Well, as I said, it happened about 8 months later after my second collapse. But my second collapse was caused because of the medications they put me on after I had left the hospital for the first time. I need to say I had absolutely no damage to my heart, even after with all the multitude chest compressions and electric shocks. There was nothing wrong. And the doctors couldn't understand why that was. They said I got lucky, but I knew it had to be more than that. There was more than luck involved. And my answer as to why my collapse happened in the hospital's fitness area with all that help available, rather than an hour earlier out in our pasture, came in the middle of the night. Now, I don't remember this, but the next morning I came down for breakfast and I plopped myself in the chair because the meds were making me really drowsy all the time, and I had balance issues because of it. And Mary was sitting at the other end of the table with a notebook in her hand. And she said, well, do you want to hear what you said last night? And I said, well, I didn't remember saying anything. And she said, oh yeah, you did. And I said, okay. And she said, well, first of all, you sat up in the bed and you were mumbling to yourself. And I had no idea what you were talking about. But I grabbed my notepad and pen because I thought there might be something coming that you needed to know about. And she said, all of a sudden you stopped mumbling and you started to shake your head from side to side. And you were saying, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. And she told me that she asked, okay, what don't you believe? And she said, I told her, just said out loud, the reason I came back. And she said, well, why did you come back? And she said, I told her, or just spoke out, that the reason I came back is I was told I needed to come back to be a conduit of hope for those who don't have any or don't think there is any. And there was a silence. And I said, okay, what happened then? She said, nothing. You laid back down and went to sleep. So I don't remember any of that, but I'm grateful for her to having written it down, because that was the answer I had been looking for 8 months as to why I came back. If I had collapsed out in the field, there wouldn't have been anybody that would have known that. She would have come home from her job and not know where I was, would have seen the car still there, but not know where to even look for me. So I collapsed where there was help, when there was help, because I was told I had something else to do. So that's not an ego thing. I mean, I'm one of the last people that wants to be out really talking about all this stuff, but I'm happy to do it because I'm grateful now for having been given that experience so that I can tell others what it was. Now, everyone has the chance to accept it or not. I mean, it's a choice. It's a choice like I had, well, I could turn right to get my tires changed, or I could turn left and go to a fitness center. Unbeknownst to me, that's, where I got the help. So I think we are given choices that we can make, and we often have to live with the consequences of our choices. So that was another important thing that I learned, that take ownership of what choice you do make, because you made it. Unless you're having someone else direct your life, you're the one ultimately that makes the choices. And you can blame other people for what happens to you, but it still comes back to the person who made the choice in the first place. So there were a couple other things that I want to mention. We are here to learn. This is what I've learned from my experience. We are here to learn in this dimension. We aren't here to be punished. We aren't here to be ground down to nothing. We are here to experience this life in a body form that we could not experience in our higher selves, our higher energetic essence in that other dimension. I like to use an example or a metaphor. In 1951, I made a choice to get onto the superhighway off-ramp, the energetic superhighway off-ramp, and come down into this lower dimension, lower energetic dimension. I was born with my parents. I was raised by them. I've now spent roughly 73 years here. And when I have used up all the fuel in my body, which will have, I will leave it finally, but I'll get on the on-ramp to the energetic superhighway, and I will go on to another experience somewhere else, because I will always exist, not in this form, but in the form that makes all the difference, that eternal energetic essence, that DNA of the creator, the God essence that I mentioned before. That is how we will continue to exist until we may embody in another dimension somewhere else, in all those that I had seen, that we then do something else. I don't know what could be better than that, because we just keep going onto our next experience until our soul finally learns everything it's supposed to learn. And then I think we turn into spiritual guides for other people. That's my belief. Now, people can believe what they want, but from what I've seen, that is the evolution that makes the most sense to me. Two things I'd like to leave with anyone who listens to this. The first is that love and recognizing the divinity of everyone we meet, we don't meet, everyone we like or don't like, is the reason for our journey in this dimension. And the second thing is that hope is the pathway on this journey on which we all can walk. That is what we can do if we choose, and the choice is there and it's available.